Five, four, three.
The designated hour having arrived, I call to order this regular meeting of Ansel Glink's Quorum Forum podcast. The podcast, local governments need to do business. In the chair, it's me, Daniel J. Bolin. And on the agenda today, it's our 2021 election special. Today, we're talking about common things that confuse people about local government elections. But first, let's take the roll. We have an attorney here at Ansel Glink. He served 10 years as general counsel to the Illinois State Board of Elections and the DuPage County Board of Election Commissioners. He's a voter, and we're going to ask him about it. Ken Menzel is here.
I'm present, Dan.
Ken, I know you're a regular voter. I want to ask you about your experience voting for the 2020 election. At the time of this recording, that the 2020 election has not occurred as of yet. Listeners who may be listening to this in the future, that will have been in your recent past. But Ken, what was your experience voting this time?
I normally do the early voting sort of routine, and it's always been very smooth where I live in DuPage County. This year I opted to get a mail-in ballot, and I dropped it off at the drop-off box at the DuPage County complex. It was as smooth as could be. The county clerk had a very nice online sort of tracking arrangement. I got a message fairly quickly that my ballot had been processed and accepted. Worked as smooth as could be.
Oh, that's outstanding. I had a similar experience with here in Chicago. The Chicago Board of Election Commissioners had the drop-off boxes at the early voting sites. I ran up to the one by in my ward and dropped it off. It was, pretty seamless. It was a pretty good experience. I didn't have to bother with the mailbox or anything. Just dropped off my mail-in ballot in the secure drop box. And they've been emailing me about it. They're like, hey, I got emails from the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners like, hey, we haven't received your mail-in ballot yet. I'm like, here's a video of how to go do it. And I'm like, oh yeah, gee whiz, I should probably get around to that. And so I finally did over the weekend, and I'm glad to hear your experience. It was just as seamless as mine. We're also joined today by a bunch of folks on the live stream. Thanks for joining us. Please share your questions with us in the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. But as always, we're not giving legal advice. If you need legal advice, talk to your attorney. Behind the glass for our protection, engineer Rick is present. We have a quorum. The big point of confusion, we're talking about confusing things about local government elections. Folks might be confused why we're talking about local government elections before the general election is even over yet, the 2020 election. But the local governments are looking ahead to the 2021 election and have been for quite some time. And we're glad to have you here today to talk about those important issues for us. The first one is kind of some of the things that this pandemic time election might teach us for next time. And the first thing is the special laws about election day 2020. What are they, and what do we need to know about them for next time?
But one thing that we had was Election Day in 2020, for us tomorrow, for our listeners probably a couple days past, is that it's been declared a holiday where governmental offices are supposed to be closed other than those being used as polling places. Caused a fair amount of confusion. I think everybody's come to an idea of what they're going to be doing with their offices on those days.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Seeing as we're right up against it, yes. But that's only for 2020 and does not at this point apply in 2021. That would have to be further legislation when the legislature gets back into session.
Right. Veto session coming up later this month. They're expected to convene again, the legislature. They had that short session back in May, I think it was, and had a real focused session. We're a few weeks out from when the scheduled veto session will take place. It'll be interesting to see whether they make any changes for local government elections. We haven't heard anything as of this recording, but right, that special law for Election Day 2020 was special, and that those amendments to the election code were just for Election Day 2020. To your point, Ken, something the legislature would have to change something, do something to make that apply to future elections, including the local government elections in the spring. Now, another part of that law, that those amendments to the election code for pandemic time elections, is the Department of Public Health put out some guidance about polling places. And so what was that guidance? And did that only apply to this election? And do we expect that to be applied to future elections?
Well, the statute did apply to the November election. It mandated that the election authorities follow the Department of Public Health's guidelines for the November election. Had a lot to do with cleaning and disinfecting, physical barriers, social distancing, and the like. One of the things that I was pleased to see is that most of the election authorities had done most of all of that for the March primary before the legislation had passed.
Mm-hmm.
I expect we'll see the same protocols in place in 2021, although it may not be part of the mandate from the statute. A couple of the interesting things from the public health guidance, though, election officials cannot bar people who refuse to wear a mask, and voters cannot be screened for COVID before they're allowed to vote. But the election authorities will make masks available for the potential voters who have arrived without having brought one.
Yeah, we got a lot of questions about this from local government buildings, folks that have local government buildings that also service polling places. You know, like, what do we do? What are the rules going to be? And the Department of Public Health guidelines kind of had a procedure for what do you do if somebody shows up without a mask? Well, the election judges they have the guidance on what to do when that occurs, and like you said, they've got the masks, and they try to direct those folks to a separate area, but you don't keep them from voting. And it's have you heard any issues like that during early voting, or do you expect any issues to come up during the 2020 general election?
From the people I know with election authorities, I haven't heard there being significant problems relating to the protocols.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, most of those protocols were things that the election authorities had put in place for the general primary before, which ran, all things considered, I think, pretty smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm cautiously optimistic about Election Day for 2020 and then our 2021 elections.
And to your point, fortunately, these are some things that election authorities have been doing, since the March primary, and they're going to do them during the general election. And while this guidance is focused on the 2020 election, do you expect to see this carry forward to the local government elections in the spring?
I can't imagine that the pandemic will be over by then, and I can't imagine that the election authorities will step back from these protocols, even if they aren't specifically mandated under the statute and the Department of Public Health guidelines. I suppose it's possible Department of Public Health will revise guidelines prior to the 2021 elections. And if they do, I expect the election authorities would go with whatever revisions there are.
That's good to know. Something to keep an eye on, but it seems like the rules that they have seem to be working. Like you said, we haven't heard of any real big problems during at polling places thus far, and hopefully that continues. And hopefully this pandemic is over by spring. But to your point, it'll probably go a bit longer than that. Election authorities are going to have to prepare for that, I expect. Speaking of the spring, Ken, the 2021 consolidated elections. These are the local government elections. Let's turn our attention to them, kind of away from the 2020 general election. When is the consolidated elections, and what are some things we need to know about them?
For 2021, there are two elections. There's a February 23rd primary that's not conducted in all places. You'll see that where you have cities or townships that have established party primaries, or cities or villages with nonpartisan primaries. That's where too many people have filed and they have to winnow the pool down for April. So most of the state will not see the February 23rd primary, but there will be places where we do have that to get the candidate pool narrowed down for the April 6th, 2021 election, the consolidated election, where we actually choose all the mayors and township supervisors and our school boards and our park boards and our library boards. And everyone in the state will be able to vote on April 6th.
Good to know. So these are those are the big dates that we're looking forward to. When people talk about local government elections, let's talk about some of the common areas of confusion that trip people up. We talked about these at the top. This is the kind of the headliner in the episode description, anyway. So why don't you help tell us about some common areas of confusion, and if you can, clear them up.
One of the more common areas of confusion that we see is between nonpartisan and partisan elections. The nonpartisan format of election is where candidates are not allowed by law to run with a party label. It doesn't mean that they don't belong to a party, but the structure of the election does not allow them to appear on the ballot labeled as such. School boards, park boards, library districts, those are nonpartisan in every instance. No matter how politically you are active you might be, you don't appear on the ballot in those kinds of units with any kind of a party label. Now, townships are all partisan. Cities and villages, most of them are technically partisan. Some of them have become nonpartisan, and I think that's where the confusion really starts to creep in. Again, in the nonpartisan format, you're not permitted to run with a party label. In the partisan format, you can run with a party label, or you can run as an independent. We have a number of communities throughout the state that are technically partisan, where the candidates historically have all run as independent candidates. And after a while, it starts to get this idea creeping into people that not only haven't they done so, but they're not allowed to do so.
Right. There's this tradition of everybody just runs as independent candidates, and they start to think that, oh, we don't have political parties here. Everybody's independent, but that somebody technically could show up and file to be partisan candidates in those communities. But then there's other kinds of communities that are strictly nonpartisan, that are you can't run as a political party or as a member of a political party with that party label. But that's a common area of confusion that we hear about all the time. Just because by tradition, folks regularly run as independent candidates for a long time.
To help a little bit with that, if a municipality was incorporated prior to May of 1993, it started out as partisan, and to become nonpartisan would have had to go through a referendum process. If the municipality was partisan before that, it remained partisan after the law changed with our default value, if you will, because after May of 1993, newly incorporated municipalities started out as nonpartisan, needed to go through the referendum process to become partisan.
So why is this important? I mean, the independent partisan, what's what kind of different things do they have to do? Candidates need to do to run under those different labels, and what does it mean for the local election officials?
But one of the important distinctions, nonpartisan, the nonpartisan format is potentially subject to a primary.
Mhm.
If enough nonpartisan candidates file in a municipality, not a school board or a library board, we're only talking municipalities at this point. But if enough nonpartisan municipal candidates file, you have to have a primary to narrow the field down. They have to file on that schedule in mid-November that allows them to conduct the primary if it's needed. If you're a partisan format and your candidates are running as independents, they don't file until that week in mid to late December. So knowing which you are is important for knowing when your candidates file, as well as being prepared for the possibility, if you're partisan, that you might see party candidates.
That's good to know and something to be mindful of. They've got different filing dates to be mindful of. The filing and objection periods are either going to ruin your Thanksgiving or they're going to ruin your Christmas. And maybe this is a fine opportunity to talk about what the filing dates are for the spring elections. This would be a fine segue if because I'm such a good host.
For established party candidates or nonpartisan candidates in municipalities who are potentially subject to that February 23rd primary, they will file beginning November 16th and running through November 23rd, just prior to Thanksgiving. In a new party or an independent candidate, or those nonpartisan candidates running for other types of units of government like school boards or library boards, who go directly to the April 6th consolidated election. Their filing week begins December 14th and runs through December 21st, so immediately before Christmas.
That's good to know for candidates. What important dates do local governments need to know about for, say, referenda, do you think?
For referenda, it's rarely possible to do one at the primary, so we focus on the April 6th election. January 4th would be the last day for the public to file petitions requesting a referendum. January 11th will be the last day for objections to petitions if the public files them requesting a referendum. January 19th is the last day for the governing board of a governmental body to adopt a resolution or ordinance calling for a referendum.
And then one more question about deadlines. What about townships? I think they have some important deadlines to know for township caucuses.
Well, November 1st is the deadline for township clerks to notify the township central committees of their obligation to report the time and location of their caucuses. November 11th is the deadline for the chairman of the parties to notify the township clerks when and where they're planning to have their caucuses. Of course, the caucus for a township would be December 1st this year.
Very good to know. Important deadlines all. But before we move off of important dates and deadlines, we got a question from the chat. If you would, Ken, how many is enough candidates to require a primary? So when you're talking about the primary, what's that trigger when for communities that have primaries? How many is enough candidates to trigger that primary requirement?
In a partisan system, so if you have an established party in your municipality and more people file for an office than can be nominated to it. So for mayor, you'd have a primary for mayor once you got your second Republican or Democratic candidate. Or if you have a locally established party, the Civic Betterment Party is your local established party, Your second mayoral candidate would trigger a primary. If you have 3 trustees running at large, your 4th trustee would trigger the primary to winnow that down to the 3 that the party could potentially nominate. Over on the nonpartisan side of things, it's when you have more than 4 times the number of people who could be elected to the office. So for mayor, 4 times the one office is 4. The 5th person would trigger the primary to winnow things down. If you have 3 trustees running at large, 4 times 3 is 12, so your 13th person would be the one who triggers the primary. And that's partly why we don't have very many primaries in nonpartisan municipalities.
Oh, because there's a because
It takes a fairly big pool.
You need a really big number to trigger that primary. What happens if you have a lot of independent candidates?
No matter how many independent candidates file, they all go to the ballot.
That's important to know. And so in communities that typically where people typically only run as independents by tradition or what have you, that you could see why they would not often have primaries in those communities because unless a partisan candidates file, which would be a surprise in many communities that just by tradition folks run independent all the time. That's a great question from the chat. Appreciate it. But a great answer too, Ken. That's you really nailed it, I think. But the next part of the segment, Rick's throwing it up on the screen in the live stream. Filing procedures. This is something that clerks are very concerned about. They're looking forward to these filing periods that you mentioned. What are some things they need to know to get ready for the filing period?
Well, before the filing period, clerks don't have any real official duties or responsibilities. However, the State Board of Elections strongly encourages clerks to give a pre-filing notice. Press release issued to the public or to the papers, posted around the governmental office or other places where notices are usually published. Letting people know the times and places where the petitions will be accepted. People want to know where they go with their petitions and when they can file them, and it's good to have some sort of a notice up on the website, released to the papers, posted around the city hall. It tells people when and where they can file.
Yeah, that'll help things go a little bit smoother when the filing period arrives. You don't have to do it, to your point, but it's something that you can do to help things communicate those office hours and let people know when you're going to be open and what days and until what times. And so that's an important point. When do local election officials need to be open during the filing period?
Well, of course, they would be open at least their regular office hours during each day of the filing period, and they're mandated on the last day of the filing period, that final Monday, to be open until at least 5 p.m.
Right. So not all local government offices are open till 5. They're not required to be. They could set their own hours. But on that last day for accepting nomination papers, they got to be open to 5. Under the election code requires them to be open till 5 on that last day. Kind of a uniform requirement, and it's something you want to include in your filing notice to let people know that that's what it's going to be, especially if it's deviating from your regular office hours. That's if you're only open to 4:30, usually letting people know you're going to be open to 5 that day is maybe something you want to share with everyone. So what else can local election officials do to get ready for the filing periods?
Many local election officials provide candidate information packets. In addition to filing times and locations, they might provide references to the candidates guide that the State Board of Elections publishes. They might provide sample forms that the candidates can use. Usually based on the State Board of Elections suggested forms. Some of them will also do the minimum signature calculation. That's certainly something that's should be done with some caution, should be checked. You don't want to be wrong on that sort of thing. I'll note one of the things that through the years when calculating a minimum signature requirement, some people forget that when you apply your signature formula and come up with a fraction, you always round that fraction up to the nearest whole number, no matter how small the fraction is. When you apply your 5% of the ballots cast at the last election calculation, and you come up with 94.1, the minimum is 95, not 94.
Right, and this is one of the questions. If somebody objects to nomination papers, what is the signature requirement? Could be one of the questions that the electoral board decides. So when spoiler alerts for later on in this in your comments, Ken, but after these nomination papers are filed, there's an opportunity for folks to object to them, and electoral boards convene to review those objections. And if the objections is there's not enough signatures, what the signature requirement is could be one of the questions that the electoral board takes up in the course of that procedure. So exercising caution when passing out information about signature requirements in your informational packets, that's a question that you want to be careful about because that could be a subject of dispute later on.
And that's also one of the reasons that we advise anyone doing an information packet have a nice disclaimer indicating that the local election official is, not an attorney, that they shouldn't be relying on the information provided. They should check things with their counselor, with the State Board of Elections, or other competent advisors before they rely on things that they're given.
Right. So you're just giving this information out to be helpful. People should verify that information with their own attorneys, election attorneys, their own counsel. Verify that information on their own, and not just rely blindly on the information in the packet. That's just there as guidance for the convenience of folks to as general guidance. So, and that disclaimer is important. And if you're giving out an informational packet, do encourage people to consult their election attorneys on those kinds of questions. So we were. What else do we need to know about filing procedures, Ken?
Well, there's of course the potential for, well, let's see, let's start with this. When petitions are filed, clerks have to issue receipts. They have to keep track of all the petitions and documents that are filed. They need to timestamp or keep track of the exact time when all of the petitions are filed with them. They need to accept all of the papers that are in apparent conformity with the election code. They should date and time stamp the nomination papers, and they have to preserve them for at least 6 months after the filing period.
Do you encourage people to take photos of these papers at the time of filing?
Having a photograph of the condition that the petition was in when it was filed is useful, potentially, when we get to the objection phase, if there is any. One of the requirements of the election code is that the petition is securely bound. You usually see them with a 2-hole punch and spindles or that sort of thing. If the accusation later is that it came in and it wasn't securely bound, it's good to have that photograph of the condition that the petition came in. The clerk has frequently had to disassemble the petition to make copies of it when requested. So it's been processed a little bit after filing. Having the picture of exactly what it looked like when it came in is useful if there's an objection to whether the petition was securely bound or not.
At a minimum, make a note of how it was bound at the time of filing. When you say that local election officials should keep track of the documents that they receive, that is a good thing to note. What do you use in terms of a lot of clerks use a filing receipt. What's on a good filing receipt that local election officials use?
A good filing receipt, I mean, in addition to noting the date and time, we'll have check boxes to indicate that there was a statement of candidacy, there was a receipt for a statement of economic interest, that there were signature pages turned in, frequently noting either the number of pages with signatures that were turned in, or a line where, if they're not actually counting them, where they can fill in what the highest numbered page was at the end of the signature pages.
So just keeping a record of what it is that you received. So, like to your point, these documents get processed and are going to be used. People are going to make copies of them. You want to make a record of what it is that you received at the time of filing, and so you can help keep track of that stuff. Speaking of getting copies, we got a question in the chat. Are these nominating petitions, these nomination papers, are they subject to FOIA?
Pretty much everything is subject to FOIA. However, our recommendation is, because you have a very brief period of time to review petitions prior to making an objection, if you're going to make one, requests for copies of petitions should be processed as rapidly as possible. Don't make people wait the 5 days that's available under FOIA before you give copies out. So you only have 5 business days after the end of the filing period to file an objection. And if you're making people wait 5 days, there's basically no time to review the petitions, see if they're in accordance with the requirements of the law.
That's don't play games with making copies of papers. You could process it as a FOIA request, but don't make it. Don't wait out the whole 5 days, and because these are expedited proceedings. These objections to nomination papers. The deadlines are tight and they don't move and they're unforgiving, and so you want to share that information with folks. Comment in the chat. Our clerk scans and posts the petitions on the city website. Is that a interesting or good practice, you think, Ken?
I like the idea of scanning everything that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a position at that point to provide copies almost immediately, or like some entities do, they will provide copies on burnt to a CD. The PDF copy of the petition can be put on a CD and rather rapidly given out to people who are requesting. I like that. I'm not necessarily crazy about the idea of putting the petitions up onto the website.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of voter signatures on there, and
Yeah.
I can see some pushback from people who don't like their signature associated with their address right up there for all the public to see.
Yeah, that's true. And if you are gonna, I've requested copies of petitions from election authorities in the past, and they having them accessible or at least able to be emailed to requesters easily through a PDF is very nice. One thing I've encountered in the past is I've received incomplete scans of what was filed, which is inconvenient when if you're an objector and you're trying to work on an objection to nomination papers. It'd be nice to have all the papers. But
and from the local government standpoint, you want to make sure you get everything out there, because you're going to be generating extra objections if it appears that there are only 100 signatures when there are actually 200 because you've given out an incomplete copy.
Yeah. So that's so when you're are these subject to FOIA? Yes. Should you turn them around quick? Yes. Should be careful to turn around complete copies of what was filed, to avoid some problems for everyone. So, but before you move off of filing, we were talking about the securely bound requirement. There's a question in the chat about, do you consider a paperclip to be securely bound? And this is a thorny question. It has to do with the maybe what part of the state you're in, and maybe how many pages of nomination papers you have, right, Ken?
I've seen that question go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So any candidate that ever asks me, I tell them don't use a paperclip.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because it's entirely possible that you lose that one. My personal view is that it's not secure, and that if you just kind of hold that petition up and shake it a little bit, you can get pages falling out of that.
Mhm.
To me, securely bound would be something where you've used a hole punch and put something through the hole in such a way that you can give that petition a bit of you can drop it, you can shake it a little bit, and pages aren't going to be slipping out of there. The typical petition I see is the Echo 2-prong fastener with the little clip over the top and the metal sliders. Almost everybody uses those. That seems to be the kind of picture of secure. I've seen others with a plastic coated wire through holes. That's undoubtedly secure. The binder clip, the paper clip, those are where you're starting to get into that sketchy area where it's very easy to lose an objection on that basis. I would recommend against it.
Yeah, right. Maybe you could prevail, but there's a case on it where paperclip wasn't good enough, and that's going to invite a challenge. And even if you're successful, you had to go through the unpleasant experience of having an objection filed.
Well, as one of my mentors always told me, you can't lose a fight you don't have. Don't court fate by doing something that will invite an objection.
Good advice. Yeah. Be cautious when you're binding nomination papers. Now, as a local election official, you take them as they're presented to you, right?
Yes, you do.
And this is this kind of leads to another question in the chat. What if a partisan candidate submits the incorrect petition, like a nonpartisan petition, in a community that doesn't have nonpartisan elections? Does the local election official, in your view, just need to accept the papers that are presented?
As the local election official, I would accept what was presented to me and let the objection process run its toll.
Right. So that's a question that you kind of accept what's filed, and the objectors will have an opportunity to comment on the form of the nomination papers during the objection process, but that's for them to do, and the local election official just is there to accept filings. So, but would that even be an apparent conformity question? Or remind us what apparent conformity is, Ken.
Apparent conformity is a petition would be viewed as being in apparent conformity when you just look at the petition itself. It has all of the legal requisites, or appears to have all of the legal requisites of a petition. And in order to say that it didn't, you would have to go outside of the document itself to rely on some sort of outside evidence of its insufficiency. For example, if 50 is the minimum signature requirement and there's 50 signatures presented, it's in apparent conformity as far as signatures goes. Just because a couple of those signatures aren't valid, they don't live in town, they aren't registered voters, you can't tell that without looking outside of the document of the petition to say that it's not valid. So that's the sort of thing you look at for apparent conformity. Is there a statement of candidacy? Are there a number of signature sheets that have a gross number of signatures that equals or exceeds the minimum? Is there a receipt for statement of economic interest? Those are the things, if they're all there, you have a petition that's in apparent conformity.
But if somebody files something that is, the wrong petition form, you should probably take what's filed there's no requirement that this apparent conformity review from the local election official take place at the counter at the time of filing. It's a technical issue, like you said, about whether you need to look outside the four corners of the filing to determine whether this is an apparent conformity issue. It's probably best not to make that call at the counter. That probably best to talk to your attorney and have a thoughtful discussion about that. Well, whether that's something that's an apparent conformity issue or something should be left up to the objection process, right?
Indeed, always get legal counsel involved before you reject anything on an apparent conformity basis. I tend to go a step further. A local election official that's contemplating the idea of exercising apparent conformity before the filing period I think, should generate a set of guidelines as to exactly what it is that the clerk is going to be looking for, and limit their apparent conformity review to what's in their written guidelines that's available to everybody ahead of time. It avoids the allegation that they're all of a sudden picking and choosing what they're going to look at to help their friends and injure their opponents.
Mm-hmm.
The State Board of Elections, the Cook County Clerk, the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners, they all have written sets of guidelines as to what they do for their apparent conformity review. They make that available before the filing period so everybody's on that level playing field, and they avoid allegations of favoritism in the apparent conformity review. It's also good to remember there's not really a mandate that the clerk do apparent conformity. And of course, when there's an apparent conformity fight, the local election official is the defendant. If you leave it to the objection process, that's the candidate and the candidate's opponents duking it out with you kind of on the sidelines.
Right. So that's definitely something to be cautious of, something to seek legal counsel about when you're talking about whether these filings are in apparent conformity with the election code. Some more questions, Ken, if you would. Well, what about this new law about electronic signatures on petitions? Is there one?
We've gotten a lot of questions on that, and there is now no new law allowing electronic signatures on petitions. I'm pretty sure the confusion arises from litigation that the State Board of Elections was involved in with the Libertarian and Green parties that solely related to access to the ballot at the November 2020 general election. As a part of the settlement to that litigation, there were reductions in the minimum signature requirements for the new parties and independents, and they were allowed to gather signatures in an electronic fashion, by facsimile, for the example, so that you didn't have that original wet on ink on paper signature. That is not something we're looking at for the 2021 elections. There is no electronic signatures for them, unless, God forbid, we get some sort of litigation between now and then.
Or if the General Assembly steps in, but that would be surprising because the circulation period, as you mentioned, Ken, is underway, has been for some time.
By the time the General Assembly gets back together, nonpartisan and established party candidates for municipal office will pretty much have already been filed or will be in their filing week when they get together. It would only leave a few weeks before the independents and new parties would be filing. I just don't think we're going to see anything in the way of legislation that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. If they didn't do it by legislation for the general election, it would be surprising if they did it for the spring elections. And as you suggested, if it's going to happen, it might happen through some piece of litigation. But something to keep an eye on, but not something I'm counting on for the spring elections. So another question: what if somebody turns in some papers that aren't notarized? What do you tell clerks about notarizing papers at the counter at the time of filing?
My recommendation has always been that the local election official's office not notarize candidate petition materials. I've had a couple of embarrassing situations through the years where clerk's office staff did something stupid, ended up in the headlines for several weeks, and created something of an embarrassment. The clerk ended up having to recuse from the electoral board as a potential witness to what went on. I've always suggested that the local election official's office not do the notarization of election-related materials.
Yeah, you want to be nice, and maybe you're all the whole time, the rest of the year, you're notarizing stuff for folks just to be kind, but you don't want to get drawn into an objection or any appearance of impropriety at the filing counter. Just take what's presented and let the objections sorted out. The other questions, what is tell us about simultaneous filing lotteries. What is what is that for starters, and then when is it?
Well, for the most part, ballot order, the order in which candidates appear on the ballot is largely determined by who filed first with their petition. Now, at the beginning of the filing period, you'll have people standing in line waiting to get in. If the office opens at 8 o'clock, there'll be people there before 8 o'clock waiting to get in. If you're there at the clerk's office waiting to get in to file when the office opens on that first day, you're potentially able to be in a lottery for first place on the ballot with other people who were in line with you waiting to file at the opening bell. The other thing that we have for a lottery is in the last hour of the last day, all of the petitions that are filed in the last hour of the last day are deemed to be simultaneously filed. And you can have a lottery to determine who's the last name on the ballot. These things can be somewhat desirable to many candidates because there is at least some academic literature supporting the idea that first place on the ballot is worth sometimes as much as 5, a little more than that, % of the vote. Last place on the ballot, I've seen good figures that say about 3% additional votes from people who are just in the middle of the pack. So if you either want to be first or last on the ballot by a lot of reckoning, so we have this lottery process for the people that are at the very beginning and at the very end. But I want to note, with regard to ballot order, established parties appear first on the ballot. So the Republicans, the Democrats, if the city has an established civic betterment party, those go first on the ballot at the election. If there's more than one established party, there's a lottery that's conducted to see what order they go in on the ballot. The established parties are followed by new parties, and the new parties appear on the ballot in the order of their petitions. So if the Civic Betterment Party shows up on Monday and the Mayberry is Great Party shows up on Tuesday, the Civic Betterment Party candidates go before the Mayberry is Great Party candidates. Independent candidates come after the party candidates in the order that their petitions were filed. But, for example, if 2 independent candidates are going to be on the ballot, if they were both in line waiting to file when the office opened on that first Monday, there's a lottery to determine who's ahead of the other on the ballot. Similarly, if they were there in the last hour on the last day of filing, there's a lottery to determine which of them goes last onto the ballot.
And there's a deadline to hold that lottery, right? And that you got to let people know when the lottery is going to be. And this is one of the things that you could include in your pre-filing notice, right?
That's correct. Although you still have to notify the candidates who are potentially in the lottery that they're subject to the lottery. You have 9 days from the filing period to get that taken care of.
Perfect. Speaking of more deadlines, let's talk about. We already touched on it a little bit. Objections to nomination papers. When do those have to be filed, and how are they going to ruin my Thanksgiving and Christmas this year? Worse than the pandemic will, possibly.
That's one of those tricky things because objections are due 5 business days after the last day to file the petitions. Of course, you've got Thanksgiving week at the end of the first filing period. You've got Christmas immediately following the second filing period. So you have to figure business days. I can't tell you a set date for every unit of government because there's going to be some variation depending on holiday schedules. A business day is defined as any day that the local election official's office is open for at least 7 hours. So for the primary, the last day for filing objections will depend on how long you're open on the day before Thanksgiving, and what hours you have on the day following Thanksgiving. If you're open all day on Wednesday, the 25th, but closed for Thanksgiving and what they call Black Friday, the last day to file objections would be Wednesday, December 2nd. Now, if you're open on what they call Black Friday for at least 7 hours, that's a business day. That would shift you back to December 1st as your last day to file an objection. Similarly, for the consolidated election, what days are you open during Christmas week? Are you doing a half day on Christmas Eve and closed on Christmas, or a full day on Christmas Eve and closed on Christmas? You kind of have to count off your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 based on your full days, starting with the Tuesday after the filing period, and figure out when you've hit your 5 days with 7 hours of business.
Yeah, and this is another piece of information you could let everybody know when you're going to be open and closed, if you know, and kind of give folks a heads up when the filing periods are going to be for objections to nomination papers. That's going to help you share that information and help avoid potential issues during the filing period. So what happens when these objections get filed, Ken? I know they inspire a great deal of activity. What happens?
Well, I'll say this for our local governmental officials there. When you receive an objection, one of the first things you do is call the local governmental body's attorney. Things move at a pretty breakneck pace from there, and you want to get counsel involved immediately to help make sure you've hit all your deadlines and gotten your notices out and all of that. By noon of the second business day after receiving an objection, the objection has to go to the chairman of the chairperson of the electoral board. That's calendar days. Well, after that second business day, things start to work on a calendar day sort of basis. As you mentioned, we do recommend that objection filing deadline to be part of your notice of filings. And they should also remember that objections that don't have 2 copies filed along with the objection should not be accepted at all.
Yeah, typically you just take whatever's tossed across the counter at you. But this is the one time in the election code, or one of the times, that comes right out and says what should not be accepted, and that's if an objection doesn't include the 2 copies, which is, I guess, intended to save some work on your copy machine at the local election official's office. But it's something to be mindful of when at the time for filing objections to nomination papers. What else do we need to know about electoral boards, Ken?
One important thing to remember is that electoral boards cannot deliberate in private. Under the Open Meetings Act, an electoral board is not an entity that can deliberate in closed session. Electoral boards also have to issue their decision in an open meeting. And agendas for electoral board meetings must include public comment like other open meetings. Now, one of the things I always suggest as far as the public comment section of an electoral board meeting, I always suggest that it go after the cases are heard. Public comment is not part of the record of an objection. An objection is an adversary proceeding, sort of like a court proceeding, and people can't just walk in off the street at a criminal trial and make their comments for the record in the trial. Similarly, the public comment is not part of individual objections that the electoral board is hearing. So I suggest that the public comment go at the end of the meeting after they've comment. It's also good for the chair of the electoral board to make explicit that public comments aren't part of the record of any of the individual cases.
Yeah, it's confusing for folks it is more like a judicial proceeding, even though it's probably happening in the same room where they attend local government meetings uh, and 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 share public comment on a weekly or month bi-weekly basis, or whenever, however often they have regular meetings. But this is an electoral board. It's more like it's a quasi judicial proceeding. So that's important to let people know that the parties get to control what goes into the record, and the public comment is not part of the record of the adversarial proceeding that you mentioned. Ken, we're getting a little short on time. What are some of final election related issues you want to tell us about?
Well, one of the things we see for local government, regulation of campaign signs. It's not permissible to completely ban campaign signs. Campaign signs are a free speech exercise. If you allow any kinds of signs at all in a municipality, you can't treat campaign signs differently. There's also, if your governmental facility is an early voting site or a polling place on election day, during the time that site is being used for voting purposes, beyond the 100-foot campaign free zone, people can use public property of the polling place site to place signage and do electioneering. So if you've got a large park facility and you've got 100 foot of yard beyond the 100-foot campaign free zone, that extra yard of the facility, people can put campaign signs up on the public property while the voting is being conducted.
This is good to know. And typically, you can't just put campaign signs in the public right away. But if there's when we're talking about the area outside a polling place, the rules are a little different, right, Ken?
That's correct.
So, anything else you want to share with us, Ken, about elections before we jump into public comment? There's folks, feel free to share your comments with us in the chat or at podcast@answiclink.com. Ken, any final thoughts?
I'll make a couple of points for following the election, taking office. Municipal officials' terms commence at the first regular or special meeting after receipt of the official results from the county, unless you've otherwise set a time by ordinance. If it's set by ordinance, it can't be later than the first regular or special meeting in June. Township officials commence their terms on the third Monday in May. Township assessors take office January 1st of 2022.
That is good to know. Look at your regular special meeting schedule. It's something to be mindful of. Ken, these were all helpful things. Do you have any final points to share with us?
I think I'd be happy to go to questions.
Let's take. It is a regular meeting. We do have to have public comment. Question here sounds like from somebody that thoroughly enjoyed this live stream and wants to hear more. Are there any online trainings for local election officials? Ken, I know you've been doing a few of these for different groups and organizations. Where can local election officials learn more? I will selfishly plug in the show notes of this podcast when it drops. We'll link to prior episodes of this very podcast with our friend Carrie Lynn Krafteffer, our election specials from last time. The dates will be a little different, but the many of the issues will remain the same. Encourage you to check out those episodes of those podcasts recordings. But Kim, where can local election officials learn more?
There are some resources available at the State Board of Elections website. They're not podcasts or online training sessions as per se.
The
But there's
the website's online. That counts.
well, but there's a printed guide, a local election officials handbook, which I very strongly suggest any local election official download and take a good search through. The candidate's guide for each year is a good source of information in a non-legalese topic by topic sort of presentation that makes it a lot easier to follow the process from beginning to end instead of jumping around in the statute books. So I heartily recommend the State Board of Elections publication. From their website, the upper right-hand corner of the page, there's a link to publications. You click on that and you get several options of topics for publications, and you can download those one by one.
Those are great resources. I keep them handy all the time during election season. And not to mention your phone number, Ken, is another one that I keep handy during election season. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Moving on to the Department of Public Works, do you have any coming webinars, articles, speeches that you'd like to tell us about?
I'm not currently scheduled with anything, although the IML handbook is being updated. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be published.
It should be soon. Check out the IML handbook. The Hansel Glink works on the IML handbook. That's a fine publication for local government officials that are going to be elected at these very elections that we're talking about. We've got one more question in the chat, if you'll allow it, Ken.
Certainly.
Who are the members of the electoral board?
Well, it varies somewhat by type of body. For example, a city or village, it's the mayor or president, the clerk, and the senior most trustee. Of course, they can be conflicted out if, for example, if the objection relates to the office of mayor, the mayor can't be a member of the electoral board. He would be replaced by the second senior most trustee. Kind of similarly with a township, you've got the supervisor, the clerk, and the senior most trustee. But the election code lays out for each kind of unit of government who the electoral board members are, who the first substitute is, and if you go beyond that first substitute, you have to go to the court to get public members appointed.
Another one of those issues to when the objection comes in, call your local government attorney so that they can help you figure out. There might be different boards for different objections depending on the combination of offices, who's involved, who's conflicted out. That's something to arrange and work on. That's one of those things that happens shortly after the objections are filed. So, but yeah, it's the answers in the election code. But getting the board set up the right way, that's an important thing.
And that's part of why that's your first phone call after that objection hits your desk.
That's right. Just call Ken. Anyway. Anyhow, this is the Department of Public Works. I just want to let everybody know that we've got an IAMA, the social media workshop coming up on November 18th at noon. The Illinois Association of Municipal Management Analysts, the assistant city manager group, great group. Matt DeCiani from Hansel Glink will be there, and I'll be there too, representing the social media workshop as an episode of this very podcast. Very important issues with the employees working at home, spending more time online, and knowing what you can and can't be doing online, or doing about what folks say online, First Amendment issues, all of it. We'll talk about it at the IAMA Social Media Workshop on November 18th. Ken, I can't believe it. We've come to the end. I think we've resolved all the confusing issues about local government elections. If not, Oh, we'll be back again. I'm sure. Appreciate you joining us today.
Certainly my pleasure.
But before we go, I want to remind everyone to subscribe and leave us a review wherever podcasts are heard. We prefer good reviews. Email us your questions and show ideas at podcast@anselglink.com. And you can always leave us a voicemail at 312-604-9178. We'll play it on the show. And finally, you could always visit us online at quorumforum.anselglink.com. Ken, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second, all in favor, the ayes have it. We'll see you next time on Ansel Glink's Quorum Forum podcast. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ken.
You're welcome. Good day.
Have a good one.